let's just introduce this talk. I've been lucky a lot. And so I don't know if I'm going to give you my luck or give you my tips for luck or how to be successful. I don't know what success is. We're going to bring all these deep questions up in this talk. Startup Weekend started in Boulder, Colorado, and it was just this like simple idea. I wasn't connected. I didn't have any money. I just was in a room at the right time. And I said to my friends in the room, why am I the person that always introduces people? Why am I the one that says, this designer worked with this developer, and oh yeah, now you're doing a startup? And so we launched it. And like the process, if you haven't launched a startup, here's a founder? Good job. Okay, cool. I like it. So we're going to run through this really quick. There we go. So we created Startup Weekend, which is now this kind of global phenomenon. It's in a bunch of places. And the start, though, is often not talked about. So I wanted to spend a lot of time today talking about the start of a big thing. And so this was the original logo done by my roommate. I went out to buy beers, and by the time I got beers back, he had said, how's this look? And I said, that's great. And about 3 weeks later, we had our first event. We had a $0 budget. We did it above a bike shop. And this is some people there. Now, the guy holding the camera is the founder of Techstars, which is now a pretty big startup thing. A logo designer sitting down, Brad Feld's in the background. So it's a lot of big players just kind of were sitting around and hanging out. And a lot of people have taken that movement. So who here's been to a Startup Weekend? A few, okay. So it's just this random community event. It's really using the muse of let's create a startup over a weekend to build community. Community building startup event, not a startup building community. And so anyone, let's see, this is Cape Town. This is in Iran. They had 5 consecutive weekends during one weekend. Biggest startup weekend we've ever had in the country. This is in Zurich. This is in New Zealand. This is Lagos. This is Hawaii. This is New York City. This is Gold Coast, right up the coast from here. Sunshine Coast, yes, sorry. And so we've had this idea that's kind of, it's gone places. And it's just this funny thing that I was like, you know, me and some friends having a beer kind of created this big thing. I think that that's kind of the start that we all have right now. And the start, if you're in this room, you're thinking about how do we do this? And I'm going to run through some of the logos here as well. So it's kind of everywhere. It's in more countries than I can name. And it's just kind of fun. I was just in Zurich 2 days ago at theirs. And I've been to 67 countries kind of following around Startup Weekend and participating and loving everything I see. So I wanted to share what I've learned from this whole movement. We're in 158 countries now. We've had over 200,000 participants in Startup Weekend. Now, at a certain point, Startup Weekend and we needed to transition into a nonprofit, and I found some awesome people to run that. And I got bored, and I started Startup Week, which Sydney's having a Startup Week this week as well. And we have about 100,000 participants a year for that as well. So what have I learned from that is kind of the basis of this talk. Is that cool? The first thing I want to stress is community is the most valuable thing you have. You're going to work with everybody in this room during your next 15 years of a career. So pay attention and learn to be nice. Learn to really survive. A lot of people think of this as community, which is I'm going to ask the audience something and they're going to respond and I'm going to act on that, right? Where Microsoft actually paid a lot of money for this survey saying, how can we improve Internet Explorer? And the community said, stop. So when I say what is community, you know, there's an odd misnomer of what is community. Is it open? Is it inviting? Is it controlled? Is it a club? Is it, you know, what is community? And this is something I'm obsessed over. So I think a lot of people are developers or designers or marketers. I study community, and I love community. And I think a lot of people before this talk were emailing me like, all right, is Sydney the next Boulder? Is Sydney the next Silicon Valley? Is Sydney, well, is Sydney just Sydney, right? I think that's my biggest question right now. What makes Sydney awesome? I mean, the mayor is just here. You've seen me have this new prime minister, is that correct? That's like super supportive of startups. I was checking out the bio. It seems like they've made some money on startups. So why do you want to compare yourself to anywhere else? as a community, as the people in this room that are going to drive the future of the Sydney tech scene. This was my 14th event in Boulder, Colorado that I put together. And there's probably 10 people in the room. All right, this is like me after a year of building and building and putting my heart and sweat and tears into it, and I could get 20 people to show up. Now, if you read the book Startup Communities by Brad Feld, of the 15 events that are in that book, I started 13 of them. And so I was on this like really big surge, and I want to challenge everyone in here to realize that community is at the building blocks of what you do with startups. So now we're at this point where Startup Weekend is this big success story, and it happens, and it really makes a fundamental impact on a lot of people around the world. But it started like this. This was the first. This was the start. Would anybody show up to an event that was marketed like this? I mean, this is pathetic. I mean, it's wonderful, but it's not so nice. So when I launched it, I had a 3-word blog post, and it said, "Let's do this." And the "this" was linked to the Eventbrite page where you could buy a ticket. And then I later expanded on this, but let's together pick an idea and launch a startup around the idea in a weekend. Discussion for the idea will take place in this blog. The top 3 ideas will be picked, and then we'll build it during the weekend. Now that's evolved over 8 years and 3,000 events to this. It's a global network of passionate entrepreneurs on a mission to inspire, educate, and empower individuals, teams, and companies. So pretty similar, right? I mean, like wildly different, but through all of that, it's kind of held that same bit. This week, our events are in these cities. Our global startup battle is coming up in a month, where we'll have a lot more. So I think the biggest point I have is core values matter. Like, if you're starting something, who you are is probably the most important thing. And I think a lot of people get caught up in this trap of, I want to be a unicorn. I want to, raise all this money and be important and be on the cover of Entrepreneur Magazine. I transitioned my company to a nonprofit, put new leadership involved, and got out. 6 months later, they're on the cover of Entrepreneur Magazine. Stuff happens in this industry, and it doesn't matter, really, except for who you are. So really figure that out. And when I meet with founders, I generally spend the entire meeting talking about, what are your values? What do you want to build? Spend a year on that if you're doing a startup. Like, really, really look into that. You can launch something like this and have people excited about it if you as a person are giving back and at that core. This is when it was a nonprofit, and then it relaunched last week as part of the Techstars startup programs. So another thing that I learned that's not really intuitive till we think is you've got to give up control. Right? If you're going to be a startup, if you're going to be a community, you have to be all right with other people taking your message and empowering it. Sometimes that happens in a really cool way. Here's a Startup Week in Space. That was an awesome thing. NASA was part of it. And then sometimes people take your logo and do some funny things to it. That's not the most awesome use of branding, but I like it. So you've got to give up control, and you've got to realize that what you give to the audience, or what you give, is just the beginning. What they do it. So I call this the story of a story. So if I were to pitch you my startup, what you're going to tell your friend about it, that's the actual story. And that message is what I need to obsess over if I want to be successful. And you'll realize really quickly, if your story of a story is doing well, then your startup will be doing well. If your story of a story fails, then you need to retool it immediately. Another thing I've learned from building community is you just have to do the work. There's no secret sauce. There's no Facebook ad buy. There's no Twitter following campaign that'll get around the actual work it takes to do a startup. Now, there is a book coming out in February called The Startup Equation that does actually lay out the actual equation that you need to do a startup, if you believe it or not. And they've actually tested it on a lot of the bigger name startups, and it works. It's coming out. It's $20. Simple, right? Startups are simple. You've got all this great advice. You've got all this. It really comes down, and I love this quote, where the trick to running a successful startup is just working half a day, but every day. And it doesn't matter if it's the first 12 hours or the second 12 hours, but just half a day, every day. So there's all this culture around, like, you've got to hack all the time, and you've got to just work all the time. It matters, right? You have to put in the work, and you have to be passionate about it, and your core values have to play in part of that, because after a year, if this isn't who you are, if you really aren't that Instagram for food app, then you're going to fail. right? You might be successful, but you're going to become disinterested and not be core to who you are. So you have to understand what community means to be a big startup. And I think that's not an obvious thing to a lot of people. So what is a community? I think that it has to be collaborative. You have to be able to have people make a fundamental impact in what you do. You have to be welcoming. So the newest person in the room, welcome. Thanks for coming to this event. But what do people look at with the industry? A lot of problems happened. I was in Sydney, I think in 2008, and nobody would touch startups. Startups was this big, very, very calm thing. Nobody really thought it was sexy. Nobody thought it was something that they could actually do. Now it's much, much different. That's from a lot of people being successful and being very humble and helping each other out. You have to evolve. And I think the final, where you'll be in a year is fundamentally different than where you're at. And where you were a year ago is fundamentally something you don't actually understand what that looks like. And I think that you have to be all right with that. And you can't be owned. And I think this is the most controversial point. And when I give this, these 4 pillars to community leaders, they generally are like the startup person or the community person at their startup, and they're really trying to control something and form more of like a club. Well, clubs don't really work too well if your goal is community. So we can get in these academic conversations like, is Uber surge pricing actually community? Is this event community? Is your Facebook group about this event? Is your Facebook post about this event community? So what is community? And I'm sorry to kind of keep on saying that word, but it's something I obsess over. And I think that when you build really long and meaningful communities, you have these 3 things. Everybody feels welcome. You're greeted at the door. It's just like a dinner party. You have to feel okay being here. Everybody is valued. So every voice in this room is a voice that I care about, that you care about, and that organizers care about. And finally, everyone can be complex. Now, with these 3 things, we've kind of solved a lot of the bigger issues that come with early startup communities. When you talk about diversity, when you talk about socioeconomic backgrounds of people, if you make these 3 things work, it's really hard to have those things last as a problem. Those things work out pretty quickly when you have these 3 things. So ask yourself when you're building an event, ask yourself when you're putting up a post, ask yourself when you're saying any messaging, is this going to make somebody not feel welcome? Am I not valuing somebody that wants to be involved? Understanding your goals is probably the toughest thing about community, because I think a lot of people build community for companies very internally. And I think if you're an angel investor, a better community nets better deals. If you're a startup, or a better community means more, a better hiring pool. It all comes down to intent. Why are you doing this? If I said something very benign like, hey baby, to my child or my girlfriend or somebody at a bar or at an employee, the same words, different intent at different situations, even though I'm doing the same thing. It's a bad example for a bigger problem, but why are you the person in that situation? Why are you doing this? And if you can beat that intent, your story is going to go so much farther. Try never to say them. There's no such thing as them. There's no such thing as they don't get it. There's no such thing as they are not part of us. There's no such thing as them when you're talking about a culture, a community. It's all about we. And then you've got to have a style. This gets left out so much when people start building. You just have to be who you want. And maybe I just have this, this friend network in Colorado that just has this unique mountain style. And I respect that so much. But then I travel around and I see people trying to be somebody else so often. And they get lost. And you see them after a couple of years and they say, I'm depressed. I'm not doing it. I built something for somebody else. I'm making somebody else's goals happen for them and not me. That's tough. That's a big, big question you have to ask. Why are you here? It's going to fundamentally be different in a year. What are you building? What are you working on? Why do you care? I think coaching is an odd thing as well with startups, because if you're meeting with a mentor, you're going to learn the lessons that they learned when they learned them. So if you're meeting somebody that's super successful during the first .com startup, you're going to get their lessons learned from back then. what's now? What's happening now? It's changed. Freelancer, I remember working with them 2007, 2008 when they were Get a Freelancer. Does anybody remember those days? Can you imagine showing up to a conference in that company? Like, it's just, you're gonna have to evolve, and you're gonna have to evolve quickly. Mark's sister wrote this post. I thought it was really important. I wanted to bring it up today. There's this culture around the unicorns. There's this culture around raising a lot of money and sitting back and being an analyst. Please leave the room if you're one of them. Leave my room. Leave the room that I want to be a part of. And I'm not saying that you're not welcome, and I'm not saying that you're not part of the community by any means, but dang it, like, this technology was built on open source. Technology was built by people giving back and saying there's something bigger than themselves that they wanted to be a part of, and that was really exciting. There's a lot of new people coming to the game right now, and they're thinking that they just have to be an analyst, they have to get people to do work for them, they have to control people, they have to do the unethical part. I don't like it. A lot of people aren't liking it. This post basically equates like throwing a party with nice wine glasses and having a bunch of people show up and smash beer bottles on your front porch. A lot's happening. T.A. McCain wrote this brilliant post. He actually got to the point where he had term sheets, he had checks coming in from the best venture capitalists in the world. And at the last moment, he said, is this me? Is this my style? Is this what I want to do? And he threw it away. So it was his third startup he'd raised money for. And last week, he wrote this open post. Here's the people that are about to give me a check, and I had $2 million in funding, and have it back. I'm going to go find something that I care about, that I want to do. So raising money is not something of success. That's something that doesn't get said enough. I think a lot of entrepreneurs get involved by reading TechCrunch or reading whatever hoorah posts, and then they don't realize that there's actually a lot of people that have this give first mentality. Brad Feld, Feld.com, instant read if you don't subscribe to him already. He kind of has this model of let's give back as much as possible. The people that I value most in life are the people that have given before they've asked to receive. That's not saying that they're asking to receive anything. They're just saying that, wow, we just met. How can I help you? And those people are going to stay around in your life a lot longer than the people that are just trying to sell you something. So what's next for you? What are you going to do after this event? What are you going to do in this next year to make a fundamental impact on Sydney, this country, or the world abroad? It's a big question. I hope you're excited about the answers that you came up with. Did you think of something that you want to build instantly? Did you think of people you wanted to build it with? I think that's much more important. So I was the first employee of this little company in Boulder, Colorado called Techstars. I think you'll be seeing us more and more, especially down here. We're now at 150 people. I left for a couple years. I came back. It's this really, really fun environment to be a part of a journey. We have startup programs and startup accelerators. So we give money, and we also give a lot in programs. So we have Startup Week and Startup Weekend as part of our things. So if you're in a startup, please build in some sort of giving mechanism to your culture. Our logo is, or our motto is give first, and that's what we do whenever we can hop on a plane, whenever we can help each other out. So I've got my email on the next slide. Please let me know if I can help you. I'm super happy. Can you put my email back on the screen? It's just Andrew at Hyde.co or Andrew at techstars.com. So I wanted to open up to questions, but I actually wanted to do that in person. So I'm going to be hanging out all week, and I want to just really meet everybody. It was really fun this morning meeting everybody outside on the steps and talking. But my big challenge for you is for this event to meet a few people you haven't met, talk to them about their idea, talk to them about where they want to go, and ask that question, that very, very important question, which is, how can I help you? Thank you.